Between Valve's contributions to Linux gaming and so many tools like entire Office suites being available right in your web browser, the issue of bringing your programs over to Linux has effectively been solved except for in one major area. Graphic design work, video editors, and basically all kinds of other creative tools are still an issue for potential Linux users. Now, there are programs like GIMP, Kdenlive, and even DaVinci Resolve that usually can get the job done and actually be used to do professional grade work, but the problem is that Adobe has already firmly planted itself as the industry standard for creative tools. So if you want to go work for a company doing graphic design work or video editing and you're going to be working with other people, chances are your colleagues are already using Photoshop or Adobe Premiere Pro for video editing, and in order for you to work with these people effectively, you're going to have to use the same programs as them. Even though GIMP can technically open up Photoshop documents, a lot of the effects from Photoshop, like smart objects and features that GIMP just doesn't have, are going to be lost when you open the document up in GIMP. Same thing if you were to export your document from GIMP and open it up later on in Photoshop. The crossover compatibility with those programs is nothing like with Word and LibreOffice, where if you export a document from Word, it's going to open up just fine in LibreOffice, and vice versa 99% of the time. Photoshop and Adobe Premiere workloads are also way too complex and way too resource intensive to be emulated in a browser effectively, like what Microsoft has done with Word, Excel, and the entire Office 365 suite. You could just go online and use that stuff. So because there's no native programs for the whole Adobe suite on Linux, creative people who need to use these programs have to either dual boot Linux, or they're going to be forced to spend their full time inside of Windows, Mac OS, or iPad OS in order to get their work done. But there is one free software developer out there who is creating patches for Wine in order to get newer versions of Photoshop and basically the whole Adobe Creative Cloud working in Linux. Now, if you haven't heard of Wine, it's a compatibility layer that translates Windows API calls into POSIX ones that are going to work in Linux. If you've heard of Proton, that actually is a fork of Wine that was optimized for Steam games with patches from Valve and is basically what has made gaming on Linux possible. Now, Wine has very, very little overhead, which again is why it's used for gaming on Linux, because worst case, you might lose a few FPS, but in a lot of cases, you actually gain a performance boost over playing the same games on Windows 11 because the underlying operating system isn't using as much of your resources. Now, unfortunately, you do have to manually import this developer's Wine patches in order to get Photoshop working, and it's probably going to be a while until these patches get merged into the official Wine branch, because according to the developer, the upstream Wine repo is really slow to merge patches, which is why he submitted a pull request to Valve's fork of Wine, aka Proton, but that PR got closed pretty much immediately, telling the dev to submit it to upstream to Wine, and I still don't think a merge request has been created there. But for right now, I'm going to show you guys how to get Photoshop working on Linux, and luckily, it is not too complicated. Okay, so first thing you're going to want to do is download this guy's Wine Adobe installers from his GitHub page, and I'm going to link this in the video's description, so don't worry. You want to click on the releases, and you want to get this bleeding edge local tar.gz. That's the one that you want, and we'll just download that for now. Next, if you haven't installed Steam yet, you're going to want to go ahead and do that. So I'm on CatchyOS for this video, and luckily Steam is bundled as part of a gaming meta package that can be installed from CatchyOS Hello. So if you click on the apps and tweaks and then install gaming packages, it'll install Steam, Proton, all the stuff you need. As you can see, I've already got it installed, so we're good to go. Now, once Steam is installed and you've logged into it and all that good stuff, you're going to want to go into your home folder and make sure that hidden files are being shown. You want to go into .local, share, Steam, and then you want this folder here, compatibilitytools.d. And this is where you want to unzip the bleeding edge local. You actually don't need the tar archive in there anymore. You just need to unzip the folder, and this is what it looks like in there. We don't need to mess with anything in this folder. You just need it to be in this directory. And then you want to go ahead and restart Steam if you're still logged into it. That way, this bleeding edge local is going to be available within the Steam app to use as a compatibility layer. Okay, so we've got our bleeding edge local inside of compatibilitytools.d. We've restarted Steam, and so now the last piece of the puzzle is just to get yourself a copy of Adobe Photoshop. And I've had the most luck with running Photoshop version 2021. I know it's not the latest and greatest, but I've got a cousin that drives a truck for Adobe, delivering their products all over, and the craziest thing happened. A copy of Adobe Photoshop 2021 multilingual.iso just fell out the back of the truck, and customer didn't want it anymore, so that's how I got this copy of Photoshop. I definitely didn't download it from a Russian torrenting forum. So what we need to do now is create a mount point for this ISO so that we can get access to, well, all of its contents, but especially the autoplay.exe. So we're going to sudo, actually let me make this full screen and a little bit bigger for you guys. Sudo mount o loop Adobe, and this is where I created my mount point on mnt.iso. So we'll go ahead and do that. And now, if I go to mnt.iso, you see that I've got this autoplay.exe available here. So now we're going to have to add this autoplay.exe from mnt.iso or wherever you mounted it to into Steam as a non-Steam game. So we'll click add a game here and add a non-Steam game, and we'll browse and then go to your MNT ISO and select autoplay.exe. So it'll show up in here and then add a selected program. And now I can show you the whole reason why we're using Steam. Technically, you don't need Steam for this. You could just set your wine prefix and all that manually on the command line, but I think this is going to make it a lot easier for noobs. Once you add the game into your library, or once you add the autoplay.exe into your library, right-click on it, go to Properties, and this step here is optional. You don't have to change the name of it, but I think it makes sense just so it's not, you know, some arbitrary autoplay.exe sitting in there. Make sure you don't touch the target or start in sections though. But what you really want to change is on the compatibility tab, check this box to force the use of a specific Steam Play compatibility tool. So this is, you know, how we manage the different types of wine or proton we have installed. We want to select the bleeding edge local. So that's the same one that we downloaded and then unzipped into that compatibility tools.d folder. And then go ahead and close. And the hard part's done. Now we can just click play on Photoshop 2021. And this will launch the installer. And from here, it's pretty much the same as installing Photoshop on Windows. So we'll hit continue, and this will take a little while to run. All right, the installer's finished. So now we can go ahead and click launch. And we get this very familiar loading box that pops up if you're familiar with Adobe tools. Should just take a minute or two for this to start up. Photoshop is a very big program after all. All right, and look at that. It's Photoshop, guys. It's Photoshop running on Linux, Catchy OS to be exact. So this is one other kind of interesting thing that I found out when I was looking at the developer's Reddit post. The developer of the compatibility tool, he mentioned that drag and drop wasn't working on his setup, and he thought that it was Wayland related. So I am very happy to mention I've got some photos here. Why don't we do the one of grep? I am very happy to say that drag and drop actually does work in, I guess, X11. I mean, I'm using XFCE, but the main difference there is that the underlying tool is X11 instead of Wayland. So if somebody asks you what is the use case for X11 in the year of the Linux desktop 2026, it's this right here. It's dragging and dropping images into Adobe Photoshop. And now that we're using Photoshop, we can do the most important legitimate thing in it. I think it's this one here. Yes, we can finally draw a circle, because that's impossible to do in GIMP, right? So we could draw a circle here over my cat's belly, and this is gonna make me look like a total noob because I don't use Photoshop, but I think it's something like that. And we'll go to the paint bucket tool, and why don't we make this pink, and we'll fill this circle in, and then why don't we do another circle. So let's see, we got that circle, and then circle within the circle, and I think you hold shift to make it a perfect circle, and we'll do something like that. And let's see, can we do this? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, there you go. That's the spot right there. You place your hand there, and he destroys all your fingers in your hand and tries to bite you. Now let's go ahead and export this image. Let's see, file export as, and let's do it as a JPEG, just to show that that works, and we'll make it a great JPEG. There we go, maximum quality. And then we'll go ahead and click export. And by the way, this is a wine thing, and something that's going to be different in your workflow if you're used to using Photoshop on Windows versus Linux. One of the things that Wine does, and forks of it like Proton, is that it creates a virtualized Windows directory structure. Usually it's going to be nested inside of the Wine folder, but in this case it's going to be nested inside of our Steam folder, or my Steam folder. So this drive C, where you might be inclined to export your image, because that's what you're used to doing on Windows, this is called your Wine prefix. And on my computer, the Wine prefix is located right here. I'll split this window to make it a little easier to see. So it's inside of the hidden local folder, share, Steam, Steam apps, compat data, this number here, which I think just identifies the specific compatibility tool I'm using. So that's just, this means like bleeding edge local, PFX, and then drive C. So if I go into this drive C, you can see that the folders match what we're seeing over here. So just keep that in mind. I mean, you're going to have to drill down into these folders in order to retrieve the image if you export it here. What you're probably going to want to do, because like if you want to export it to this pictures folder here, okay, what we're going to have to do is come back over here to Photoshop, and you want to select your Z drive. So Z is basically, in Wine, is referring to your actual Linux root directory. And you can confirm that too if you're familiar with Linux. You can see that this is, a Linux file structure. So we'll go into Home, Kenny, Pictures. We'll just call this grepbelly.jpg. We'll save it. And then if I open up this Pictures folder again, boom, we've got the cat's belly right there. So there you go. The age of the Linux desktop isn't just here, but it's rapidly accelerating. As I showed you, a fairly new version of Photoshop just works fine in Linux, and it works on CatchyOS, a just works distro. Now, I am not a Photoshop person myself. I don't think I'm going to become one because of this, but I think most of the changes that have been made to Photoshop from 2020 onwards, or we'll say 2021, since that's the version that works, Most of those new features are just going to be AI slop that people don't want, especially not the Photoshop veterans that have been using this program for decades. So spread the news, like this video, and share it with your Photoshop friends that are stuck using Windows so that they can enjoy doing their work on an actually productive OS.